talk too much about performance in terms of hacking, like ECU mapping, things like that. It seems like that's getting easier and easier. Things like access port are much easier to use than, like you said, some of the stuff in the 90s, even the early 2000s. Do you see a point at which car makers will embrace that as well in terms of open source ECU mapping? I mean, there's all sorts of insurance and reliability issues there.
I think that's the. I think for aftermarket, there already are tons of ways you can get much more horsepower out of cars or torque or whatever you want by remapping the ECU, and you can buy a whole new chip or go to a place and flash it. But you got to remember, the car manufacturers, as long as they've got warranties and liability, I think they're going to be, unless they do a really, like, I could see a structured program. Like, I could see something where you could buy in. Like, let's say you buy an FRS, and in a couple of years, Scion decides they can comfortably squeeze out of that basic engine from 200 horsepower to 260, let's say. And it's basically a software change. I could see something where you could buy in, maybe you willingly abdicate whatever's left in your warranty, they'll flash it, and they'll give it some kind of other guarantee, as long as they manage it well. Things beyond that, though, are always going to be the realm of the aftermarket, and that's okay, because there's a strong aftermarket that does these kinds of things. As far as manufacturers themselves doing it, I feel like they're always going to be a little hamstrung by the legal and practical issues.
When it's interesting too, because it has to match up to the driver themselves too. So depending, I mean, if you got in your car, you drive it a certain way, you have ridiculously sloppy cams, and that thing's just gurgling, you're going crazy on when it idles. When your grandma goes to drive that car, maybe she's not so happy about how loud it is or how fast it is and that type of thing. And I think the trickle-down effect that we've seen in the manufacturers is that you have the sports mode knob and you have the eco mode and that type of thing. And I think getting more advanced with that and having more modes and making it more user accessible and making it easier to use. And as technology becomes cheaper, I think they can add more modes because they have more money for the software engineers, or it's cheaper.
I mean, it's just memory. I mean, the idea of like a mode switch that's personalized, like we have memory for seats. If you could do something for driver profiles, so you go for like one for your wife and one for you, and if your wife's crazier on the throttle than you are, it remaps everything so it works a lot better if she's in her mode. Technically, there's no reason why they couldn't do that. It's just a matter of sectioning off a little bit of memory and a switch, and they could do it. I feel like there's always, the manufacturers are always going to have just those legal restrictions, but maybe that doesn't matter so much. I
noticed you guys have like Roush and Shelby, they had factory sanctioned.
Yeah, that's true. Then there's
that was mechanical, but
yeah, but I mean, there's no reason why there couldn't be a subdivision of a company that deals with the higher end versions. And I mean, car companies are kind of doing that already, like you just mentioned. So maybe you get like an R-type VW, and that's got a whole different set of mappings for it, and as a result, maybe the warranty's changed a little and the liability's changed a little. I think they just don't want somebody getting their ECU remapped and then wrecking and then blaming them.
Thanks.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. I loved your talk. Really feel that's where we're moving towards. We are actually a group called Coast that is hacking the OBD2 port to make product. You manage your maintenance a lot better, be able to track and see what's going on. If anyone would like to talk afterwards, we'd love to hear from you.
Oh, great, thank you. Yeah.
First of all, congratulations. I came from Brazil, and I'm advertising, and I work for the industry, car industry. And in my point of view, the problem is not the car against the technology. It's the car against the traffic jam. I live in São Paulo, and the traffic jam is terrible.
That bad, yeah.
Do you think that the technology, people are losing the pleasure to drive? Do you think that the technology will bring it back?
Well, there's two ways that can happen. I know there's a lot of talk now about cars talking to one another, this whole connected car thing. And you can do a lot more traffic management if the cars know what every other car is doing. You can get things to flow better, and they're getting closer. That may not really work until we have autonomous cars, because if you have a human factor, that's always a tricky thing to deal with. But eventually, the more autonomous cars get, the more they can manage traffic flow with one another and get things much more efficient.
But I think that's interesting that even with human intervention, let's say we used a piece of technology that allowed for connected cars to talk to each other so that it could predict that it would know in advance that there's a wreck up ahead 4 miles down the road, and that in order to avoid a bottleneck back 4 miles behind and for them hitting that bottleneck, if they slowed down their speed, to some lower degree, 45 miles an hour, which left enough bumper room for everyone to for the traffic to eventually flow instead of hitting up against the bottleneck, you would have a much more pleasurable experience, especially with the concept of brake lights, and it's a binary on or off function rather than it being basically tied to how fast you're decelerating.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not like the lights get brighter. So by having just a 1 or a 0 on or off, it gives a false sense. As soon as somebody taps on their brakes, you see the
That's a
sea
good
of
hack to
red
do, by
lights.
the way. If anyone likes to make progressive brake lights,
Yeah.
would be a very good one. People have been playing with those for years.
Yeah.
They make a lot of sense.
And I think that somehow technology, now we all might not be to autonomous vehicles yet, but some sort of intermediary device that can help kind of tame traffic. In fact, there's
Like Waze, like apps like Waze are kind of doing that already. Like where people are changing their routes because they can see ahead of time based on other people's input where the traffic's the worst, and then they can mitigate things. And then the overall effect of that is that the traffic lessens and it's not as bad. So I think there are ways to mitigate it and get better. It's always, I mean, in the end, if you really want to have fun, you're just gonna have to find an empty road at some point. But it's,
Today, the sensation is we are locked inside the car.
Yeah.
So in the future, the technology will help us to enjoy the ride a little bit more.
Yeah, I think
than
that's
today.
yeah. By the way, do you know? Can you still get gurgles out there in Brazil? I don't. Do they still have them around?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are they expensive?
Yeah.
I want to get one. I always wanted a commercial. They're weird Brazil. You should Google them because they're these crazy looking Brazilian cars, also built on the VW pan. They're kind of a hack, but they're fascinating. Did that answer any of your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else have any car hacking thoughts?
I guess thanks a lot. I guess my question had to do with, it's kind of esoteric. I'm a front-end designer, so thinking about something like the OXC is really cool. Are there any front-end frameworks you guys are familiar with that could plug in and lay over the top of something like a Raspberry Pi or?
We were just discussing this actually in the Raspberry Pi realm, and I feel like at this point there has to be some distro that's meant for the car dashboard. We were just talking about this yesterday at that specific point. I mean, maybe if we find something specifically, but there's got to be people messing with that concept because they're definitely using the Raspberry Pis as the device to interface between OBD2 or as just a general
and because
entertainment center.
you've got video output so easily on it, you can get there. And the thing is, your job is hard when it comes to working in a car. Most car UIs now, I drive, for my job, I drive a lot of different cars. They kind of suck, a lot of them. They all have this kind of, they all have this look like a Chinese iPhone knockoff, the icons. And then the worst is, I've been in so many cars where for the nav keyboard, it's alphabetical. Who the fuck uses an alphabetical keyboard? Nobody. I have a 3-year-old. Yes. And like kid toys, like my 3-year-old is like a little, my first laptop is alphabetical. That's it. Who uses, it drives me crazy every time I see it because nobody uses that. And the thing is, you've got to really, it's no longer a visual interface. If you're making it so the driver can use it, there's a voice which usually works okay, but how do you get into different modes? How do you get the information in? You want maybe some visual input, and you can do things like heads up, but you can't be craning around to look at a screen. It's not easy. Do you want like gesture controls? And there's some clever things. I think Audi or BMW does it with the touch. Audi does, so they have a knob, like a little selector, like a paddle almost, and they have a touch-sensitive area on it, so instead of a keyboard, you can trace letters, kind of like an old Palm Pilot with a graffiti. You can just try to write your letters, and that's great, because that's something you can kind of do without really thinking about it.
Have you guys worked with, messed with CarPlay at all? CarPlay?
I haven't yet. No, not yet. I'm curious to see how they implement that.
Integration is really interesting.
I don't know. I mean, I think we're nowhere close to having a workable solution to that yet. But I think there's going to be a lot of room for interesting innovation. We've got buttons on steering wheel to activate the voice commands. They sort of were due to maybe things on the steering wheel grip can are different things. I don't know. If you're driving a car and you just don't want to do anything that's going to get you down, so it's your work. It's tricky. You've got to cut out for it. Yeah.
Was it Peter? Just for reference, the last question here, conference by Katie Skillman from the agency interface that was dedicated card to this. How you it's interaction. Button action.
Oh yeah. Oh, I saw that.
Definitely.
Yeah. I don't think
Easy.
all he had a different.
Research. No,
Yeah,
not like
I didn't try to
he's
figure-
actively searching.
Yeah,
Question
but
where
he's still
the car.
figure that one out.
And we have my question of we're talking about in the packing and perspective. You mentioned that consumer, which individuals, you did a way CarPlay Apple to my into view as in a way for providing the hack, maybe getting cars to on the by that's the solution. Access. Do you see cars or other company? How do you brand car type of using this to get hacking cars, the bus driver as the or to fit into the
I think it's kind of
to the
that model and
consumer.
so now there's it's like the app platform for terms build off if there it's the open some sort of key and then them to sort of video if I for that sequence that information or some it's the display added of them to just being able to install value the Panda app that comes in the install Toyota or whether it's something else or out some third party. Or if it, I think it's kind of the same way that the cell phone market went too. Actually, remember the Verizon had its own store and went back and put other apps apps in the phones and this like the iPhone data and they, eventually it's ended that concept is just a lot of people see but any app banned their app store Amazon Play or put Google Play all because other places it's be interesting.
I think also everybody who's making interesting car hacks, and does something that does succeed. Like maybe like we're talking today. I wish I parked the press car I have in a place that I'm not 100% sure is a legal spot. I'd love to be able to just not go on my phone and get a shot out of the backup camera, go see if there's a tow truck there, or to see if it's gone,
or if it's disturbed getting
an
alert on your phone, that type of thing.
So there's all kinds of applications you can think of using the hardware in the car, and maybe at some point some hacker will make something and then a company might buy it. So maybe we will see an app kind of model where you can download things that work with your car and those are all individually branded. Maybe there'll be a whole suite of things that you can buy from, maybe Twitter will have a suite of things you could get for your car that
make it more social.
Twitter branded and make it more, yeah, who the hell knows? So as soon as we start thinking of the car as a platform into which you can put your own stuff, then I think we're going to see something pretty similar to what we've seen in phones. In the same way. I mean, that's kind of been away for a while. Like, you can brand a car with aftermarket things, like people who have Holley carburetors or, in the Beetle world, the MP brand. They could get all kinds of crap on them. They were all branded. So it was a Beetle by Volkswagen, but it had all these MP parts on it. So I think it's going to be similar to that. A car as a platform for other crap. And, maybe they'll get data out of it as a way. Maybe you won't pay for it, but they're sending your driving data somewhere, kind of like they do with phone apps now. I don't know.
Thank you very much, guys.
No problem.
Amazing talk.
Thank you.
Is there anything yet, like a Bluetooth steering wheel, that you could just add onto a car and just have your own controls?
Well, I mean, there is. I mean, all of these guys who've been doing remote, like where you can control a car with an iPhone or iPad, there's a few people who've done that. I mean, that's basically what they're doing. And actually, I just saw Ford uses for their testing of their big trucks, basically a little thing that just clamps in the back of the steering wheel and just steers. It could be done. I mean, it's basically you're just sending signals to a motor for rotational motion. So you could do it. It would be a shitty way to steer if you're in the car. You get no steering feel or anything like
I
that.
was thinking it was like an easier way to use the buttons.
Oh, so you mean actually trying to integrate buttons on the steering wheel?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I thought you meant for steering.
Well, I think in the aftermarket world, definitely in that if you add in another stereo unit, in the center console that you can, or not in the center, but in the dash, that you can add then aftermarket buttons onto the steering wheel. They just kind of clamped on and added that.
Yeah.
I didn't mean like a little clamp on.
Yeah,
Actually
integrated.
That's one of those things I could see somebody making. Basically, you've just got an array of buttons that are just tied to send Bluetooth signals that you can program for whatever you want. I mean, that there's no reason why that couldn't happen. You can do that now.
You have to take care of the airbags.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You'd have to. Yeah. I mean, you could do. Yeah. That's why clamp on would be easier. Otherwise, yeah. If you do an aftermarket wheel, I keep thinking the old car world.
Right.
Where it's just
Yeah.
one
It doesn't
bolt
matter. Nope. Yeah.
plunges through your sternum when you get wrecked. Yeah. You'd have to have an airbag wheel, which would be more expensive, but I mean, it's technically doable. Sure.
Hi there, my name is Lonnie Stern, and I work with youth in STEM education. So we do a lot of design work as well as mobile app development work. And we've been considering the car when it's already kind of a robotic vehicle and what that space will look like and function like rather than just a driving vehicle. And so I've been wondering who is working on it in that space so that way we can take a look at some of that, for instance.
Actually, I've been thinking about this a lot. So last year I went to Japan for Nissan, and they're really close with a robotic car. So I was in a Leaf, basically, that drives totally on its own. They even had they have this crazy robotic car, and then to test the collision avoidance, they have a couple of guys with a mannequin that they just shove in front of it to make it spin around. You'd think there'd be something more advanced, but it's just a mannequin. But so they've got, I can actually give you some Nissan context if you want. They're very far along, but all the manufacturers are pretty far along. The one thing I think nobody's really thinking about is basically what you said. It's a robot. At some point, this is no longer just a car, it's a robot. And then we've got issues like, can you put your dog in your car without you and tell the car to go to the vet? And then the vet people know to expect it, take your dog out, the car parks itself, and then when it's done, it gets called back and sent home. Like, are there going to be new types of grocery stores that are designed, so you send your car to the grocery store, you pull up, you've already texted or emailed your order to it, they load it in the back, car goes home. Once we have these autonomous cars, we don't necessarily have to be part of the equation for a lot of the errands where we would be responsible for it before, for just driving to a place to physically get something and bring it back. Robot car can handle all that.
One I think is that in the other part of that too is how does the interior change as the car becomes a self-driving?
Sure.
Do they need seats? Is that kind of the direction you're asking in terms
You
of
could do,
interior?
yeah.
I was thinking, along the lines of, does it become your living room? Does
Right.
it become your office? Especially if you're going to do a long haul trip. Because I imagine that robotic lane will probably be the fast lane on the long highway
Yeah.
first before anything else.
Check out, actually at the Geneva show, RIN Speed, R-I-N Speed, is actually looking at the interior of the cars and kind of thinking about what will change in the interior. In terms of the interior design, essentially, the living room aspect. It's analogous to, a business class jet or something that's like that longer form, longer distance, or time-wise it's longer, so you need to be more comfortable, that kind of thing. So.
It's weird, but people have actually been thinking about this longer than you'd think in a way. Like, this is the interior of a car called a Stout Scarab. This is from 1936, and it's got like a table and these reconfigurable seats. So like this was, the idea of a car, this would be someone you have a driver, where now it's a robot instead of a human. But the idea of a car as like a space, also they looked awesome.
Yeah.
These things were great.
And like the VW bus too, because if the
Yeah,
back
that's
of a
right,
camper
bus.
top and it's got a couch and a sink and maybe you can plug it into, it has a refrigerator in it, that type of thing. It's kind of that next level
Yeah.
interior when you have more space.
And if you ever look at old pictures from the 50s when they were first thinking about self-driving cars, it's always like a family playing a board game and shit like that. I mean, that's
Chess.
going to happen. You're going to read or sleep or do whatever because, why not? And
watch a movie on the headliner as you lounge back.
Japanese have understood this idea really well for a lot longer. They get vans in a way, and a lot of their show cars have been these little vans that have been basically little miniature interiors. Partially because in Tokyo, privacy is hard to come by, and the idea that your car is also your own little personal space wherever you are is more important there. So I think to some degree, Japanese car makers have been figuring out this problem for a while and are more open to the idea of car as like a little room, a little van that gets you places. And once they become autonomous, and if you're accepting that the car you're going to have for this type of work is not a car you're going to necessarily be getting a lot of driving pleasure out of because it's not for that, then all of a sudden, things open up and you can have things be very different. There's always going to be a place for a car you want to drive. You want to drive. You don't want an autonomous car. There will always be that around, I believe. But for a lot of these little commuter cars or things like that, maybe they don't need to think that way. Maybe they could just be like little rooms. Anyone else have something they want to ask?
I think we have to
Wrap up. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys all so much for being here. It's really fun.
Thanks a lot.